In the divorce, my husband took everything: the house, the cars, the business I helped build line by line, spreadsheet by spreadsheet. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He smiled slow and satisfied, like a man finally collecting a debt he believed he was owed. My lawyer leaned toward me and whispered, "Evelyn, we can fight this. You don't have to agree." I looked across the table at the man I'd been married to for 16 years. The man who once promised I'd never stand alone. The man now trying to erase me with a signature. "Let him have it all," I said. The room froze. Everyone thought I'd given up. They thought heartbreak had finally broken me. They saw a woman signing away her life because she was too tired to resist. At the final hearing, I signed every page without hesitation. My husband's smile grew wider until his lawyer leaned in and whispered 5 words that made him go pale, because he had no idea what he was really taking. "My name is Evelyn Carter, and for a long time, I believed strength meant staying quiet. I grew up in a family where stability was treated like a sacred promise. You didn't chase chaos. You didn't air your struggles. You worked, you endured, and you protected what you built." I carried that mindset straight into my marriage with Daniel Carter. When Daniel and I met, he was all ambition and restless energy. He talked about the future like it was something he could bend with his hands. I was different. I planned. I organized. I saw risks before they turned into disasters. He called me grounded. I thought it was a compliment. We married young, with more dreams than money. Our first apartment smelled like old paint and burnt coffee, and the heater only worked if you kicked it twice. Daniel had a business idea, a consulting firm that promised to help struggling companies find their footing. He had vision, but no structure, no systems, no numbers that actually added up. That was where I came in. I worked a full-time job during the day and handled the company's operations at night. I built the budgets, tracked the expenses, negotiated contracts, and fixed mistakes before they ever reached a client. When Daniel stood in front of investors, confident and smooth, I was the one sitting in the back, holding the spreadsheets that made his confidence possible. People called him a self-made man. I smiled and let them. The company grew, slowly at first, then all at once. Bigger clients, longer hours, more pressure. When we bought our house, Daniel raised a glass and said, "We did it." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Our children came soon after, first Lily, then Ethan. My world shifted overnight. I learned how to hold a phone in one hand and a baby in the other while calming a client on speaker. I learned how to function on 3 hours of sleep and still make sure payroll went out on time. I told myself this was partnership, this was marriage. But as the business expanded, something changed. Daniel stopped asking for my input. Then he stopped acknowledging it. My role quietly shifted from partner to support, from essential to expected. He'd say things like, "I'll handle the big decisions," or, "You don't need to worry about that anymore." At first, I told myself it was temporary. Stress, success, the cost of growth. I ignored the way my name disappeared from internal emails. I ignored how contracts I helped draft were signed without my review. I ignored the way Daniel introduced me at events not as his business partner, but simply as his wife. I didn't fight it. I thought loyalty would protect me. I thought love would count for something. I had no idea that while I was holding everything together, Daniel was already learning how to let go of me. The cracks didn't arrive with a single fight or a slammed door. They slipped in quietly, disguised as normal stress, normal distance, normal excuses. At first, it was small things. Daniel stopped asking how my day went. He started taking calls during dinner, stepping outside while I cleared the table alone. When I brought up concerns about cash flow or vendor costs, he waved them off with a distracted smile. "I've got it handled," he'd say. "You worry too much." Those words used to comfort me. Now, they felt like a dismissal. As the company grew, Daniel changed, not all at once, but enough that I began questioning myself instead of him. He dressed better, spoke sharper, started using phrases he'd never used before, words like scaling and dominance, as if business were a war he intended to win at any cost. At meetings, he interrupted me. Then he stopped inviting me altogether. One afternoon, I noticed my access to certain internal accounts had been restricted. I assumed it was a technical error and asked him about it that night. He didn't even look up from his phone. It's just cleaner this way, he said. You don't need to be buried in that stuff anymore. Since of this game down some stacks of long shit isn't mated. Insisting their prove in the spaced into stated pertus and is boffed in the stop. Cleaner for who? I wanted to ask, but I didn't. I was exhausted. From the kids, from the business, from constantly proving my value in a life I had helped build from nothing. I told myself this was what support looked like, that stepping back was another form of contribution. Then the comments started. You're too emotional about this. You take things personally when they're just business. You wouldn't understand the pressure I'm under. Each sentence landed softly, but together they formed something heavier, something that pressed down on my chest and made me doubt my own instincts. I began apologizing for questions that were reasonable. I stopped pushing back when decisions felt wrong. Daniel noticed. And he took advantage of it. He began traveling more, sometimes without telling me until the night before. He stopped attending school events with the kids, claiming deadlines and investor calls. When I asked him to be more present, he laughed under his breath. Someone has to keep this family afloat, he said. It's not like you're doing that anymore. That was the first time I felt truly invisible. The man who once praised my attention to detail now treated it like a flaw. The same focus that had protected our business was suddenly framed as insecurity, as weakness. One night, after the kids were asleep, I finally confronted him. I feel like I'm disappearing, I said quietly. From the company. From you. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed, his expression tired, annoyed even. You're imagining things, Evelyn, he said. You wanted stability. This is what stability looks like. I have a knot to keys. I stared at him, searching his face for the man I married. The one who used to ask my opinion before making decisions. The one who once said he couldn't do any of this without me. I didn't sign up to be shut out, I said. He sighed, long and heavy, like I was asking too much. Maybe you should be grateful, he replied. Most women would kill for this lifestyle. That sentence didn't hurt because it was cruel. It hurt because it was revealing. In that moment, I understood something I had been avoiding for months. Daniel no longer saw me as his equal. He saw me as an accessory to a life he believed he had earned alone. I went to bed that night without another word. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying years of compromises I had labeled as love. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a formal notice of divorce. Daniel hadn't warned me. He hadn't discussed it. He hadn't even looked me in the eyes. He had already decided. And as I read through the paperwork, one truth became painfully clear. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a battle Daniel was certain he would win. Daniel didn't come to mediation alone. He walked in with confidence I hadn't seen in years, followed by a man in a tailored navy suit whose handshake was firm and whose eyes never softened. Mark Feldman, his lawyer. The kind of attorney who spoke slowly, carefully, like every word was already calculated 3 moves ahead. My lawyer, Rachel Moore, sat beside me, flipping through the documents Daniel's team had sent over the night before. I could feel the tension in the way her jaw tightened. This is aggressive, she murmured. Aggressive was a polite word for it. The proposal wasn't a negotiation. It was a declaration. Daniel wanted the house, both cars, full ownership of the company, primary custody of the kids, and minimal spousal support, barely enough to cover groceries, let alone the life we had built together. Mark slid the papers across the table with a thin smile. Given Mr. Carter's role as the primary driver of income, we believe this arrangement is reasonable. Primary driver. I looked at Daniel, waiting for him to meet my eyes. He didn't. He stared at the table like this was all just paperwork, impersonal, unavoidable. Rachel straightened in her chair. My client was deeply involved in the company's operations from the beginning. We have documentation. Daniel finally spoke. She handled support work, he said flatly. Not leadership. The word landed harder than he realized. Support. As if the years I spent building systems, managing cash flow, fixing mistakes before they exploded into crises, were just background noise. As if the business had somehow grown itself. Rachel turned to me. Evelyn, this isn't equitable. We can challenge this. I nodded slowly, but my attention drifted back to the document in front of me. As I scanned the numbers, something felt Off. Vendor expenses that seemed too high. Transfers I didn't recognize. Accounts listed under shortened names. At first, I assumed it was sloppiness. Daniel had always hated details. But the more I looked, the more a quiet unease settled in my chest. "Can I have copies of the last 3 years of financial statements?" I asked. Daniel frowned. "Why?" "Because I want them," I replied calmly. Mark hesitated, then nodded. "We'll provide what's required." That night, after the kids were asleep, I spread the documents across the dining table. The same table where I'd once helped Lily with her homework. Where Daniel and I had planned vacations we never took. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for clarity. What I found was something else entirely. Invoices that didn't match payments. Payments routed through unfamiliar vendors. Expenses approved without corresponding services. My heart didn't race. It slowed. I pulled older records from storage. Cross-referenced accounts I hadn't touched in years. Slowly, carefully, a pattern emerged, one I couldn't ignore. This wasn't mismanagement. It was deliberate. Every questionable transaction led back to Daniel. His approvals, his authorizations, his signature. By the time the sun came up, I was sitting in the same chair, staring at numbers that told a story he never thought I'd read. The next day, I showed everything to Rachel. She didn't speak for a long time. "This changes everything," she finally said. "Evelyn, this isn't just divorce territory." I swallowed. "What happens if he gets what he's asking for?" Rachel looked at me carefully. "Then he also gets every responsibility that comes with it." That was the moment the fear faded. Not because I felt powerful, but because I felt clear. Daniel thought the divorce was about winning. About taking as much as he could, as fast as he could, before I had the strength to resist. He had no idea that by trying to erase me, he had handed me the truth. And once you see the truth clearly enough, you don't need to fight loudly. You just need to let the right person carry it. I didn't confront Daniel. Not that night. Not the next day. Not even when every instinct inside me screamed to slam the documents on the table and demand an explanation. Instead, I listened. I listened during mediation when he spoke about the company like it was his alone. I listened when he told friends, "We're keeping things civil," as if civility meant stripping someone of everything they helped build. I listened when he reassured his lawyer that I was too emotional to understand numbers at this level. Each word confirmed what the documents already had. Daniel believed I was finished. I met with Rachel again 2 days later, this time with a neat folder in my hands. Inside were copies, bank statements, invoices, transfer records organized the way I had always organized things. Quietly, precisely. She went through them page by page, her expression growing more serious with each turn. "Evelyn," she said finally, "this shows a consistent pattern. Shell vendors, inflated expenses, funds being routed through accounts tied to Daniel's relatives." I nodded. "I know." She leaned back, exhaled slowly. "If we bring this up now, he'll deny everything. He'll bury evidence. He'll drag this out for years." "That's what I thought," I said. Rachel studied me. "So, what do you want to do?" I looked down at my hands. They weren't shaking. That surprised me. "I want to let him take it," I said. Her eyebrows lifted. "You're talking about walking away from the house, the company, everything." "I'm talking about letting him take ownership," I corrected. "All of it." Rachel was silent for a long moment. Then she asked carefully, "Do you understand what that means?" "Yes," I said. "It means whatever the company has done becomes his responsibility." For the first time since the divorce began, Rachel smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind that comes when the pieces finally fit together. "That's a calculated risk," she said. "But if you're right, it's also very effective." From that point on, everything changed on the outside, at least. I stopped pushing back in mediation. I stopped questioning demands. I agreed to terms that made my lawyer visibly uncomfortable. "Are you sure about this?" Rachel whispered more than once. "Trust me," I whispered back. Daniel noticed immediately. His suspicion lasted about a week. Then it turned into confidence. He started showing up to meetings relaxed, almost cheerful. He talked openly about starting fresh and moving forward. He made jokes about finally having full control of the company, like it was a prize he'd earned. Once, as we waited for a session to begin, he leaned toward me. "You could have made this harder," he said quietly. I appreciate you not dragging things out. I met his eyes and gave him a small, tired smile. I just want peace. He nodded, satisfied. That's smart. Fighting only hurts everyone. I wondered if he could hear the irony in his own voice. At home, I began preparing for a different life. I packed boxes slowly, carefully, choosing what to take and what to leave behind. The kids noticed the change, even if they didn't understand it. Are we moving? Lily asked one night. Yes, I said softly. But we're going to be okay. I made sure they felt safe. That they knew this wasn't their fault. That some endings don't come from anger but from clarity. Meanwhile, Rachel contacted a forensic accountant, quietly, professionally. No accusations, no alerts, just questions answered with documentation. Every day, the case grew stronger. Every day, Daniel grew more certain he had already won. By the time the final hearing was scheduled, he was openly celebrating, talking about renovations to the house, about restructuring the company, about a future that no longer included me. And I let him, because the truth was no longer something I needed to shout. It was something I needed him to carry, all the way into the courtroom. By the time the final hearing approached, I had perfected the role Daniel expected me to play. I spoke less. I asked fewer questions. I nodded when his lawyer outlined terms that would have shattered me just months earlier. To everyone watching, I looked exhausted, defeated, even a woman worn down by betrayal, ready to sign her name on anything just to make the pain stop. Daniel mistook my calm for surrender. During our last mediation session, Mark Feldman laid out the agreement with visible satisfaction. He explained each clause slowly, clearly, as if teaching a lesson. Full ownership of Carter & Rowe Consulting transfers to Mr. Daniel Carter, he said. The marital residence transfers to Mr. Carter. All associated accounts, assets, and obligations follow accordingly. I is not min-miting. Obligations. The word hung in the air for a moment, then vanished beneath Daniel's quiet chuckle. Sounds straightforward, he said. Rachel shifted beside me. I could feel the tension radiating from her body, the instinct to object burning just under the surface. She leaned toward me, her voice barely audible. Evelyn, this is your last chance to push back. I met her eyes and shook my head once. Slowly, deliberately. No, I said. We agree. Daniel glanced at me, surprised, then pleased. See? He said to Mark. I told you she'd come around. Come around? As if I were a child finally accepting reality. That night, after the kids were asleep, Rachel called me. I need to ask you something, she said carefully. Are you absolutely certain? Yes, I replied without hesitation. There was a pause on the line. Then she sighed. All right, then we do this cleanly. No drama, no delays. That was exactly what I wanted. In the days leading up to the hearing, Daniel became almost kind. He sent polite texts about scheduling, asked if I needed extra time to pack, even offered to let me keep some furniture, as if generosity could rewrite the past. I declined everything. Not because I was angry, but because I was done pretending any of it mattered more than what was coming. The night before the hearing, I sat alone in my new apartment. It was smaller, quieter, unfamiliar. Boxes lined the walls, half unpacked. Lily and Ethan would join me the following weekend. I poured myself a glass of water and opened my laptop one last time. The files were there, organized, time-stamped, backed up. 3 years of records Daniel never thought to hide from the woman who once ran his operations. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. The morning of the hearing, I dressed simply. No power suit, no statement jewelry, just a clean blouse and neutral colors. I wanted nothing about my appearance to distract from what mattered. Daniel arrived early, smiling broadly, greeting people like a man attending a celebration rather than a legal proceeding. He didn't look at me until we were seated. You okay? He asked, his tone almost sincere. Yes, I said, and for once it was the truth. The judge entered. Formalities began. One by one the terms were read aloud, each asset transferred, each signature required, each decision made final. When the documents were placed in front of me, the courtroom felt unnaturally quiet. I picked up the pen, feeling the weight of it in my hand. Rachel watched closely. Daniel leaned back, arms crossed, confident. I signed, page after page. Line after line. No hesitation. No pause. When I finished, I slid the documents forward and returned the pen. Daniel exhaled, satisfied. He leaned toward Mark and whispered something I couldn't hear, his mouth curling into a smile that said, "This is over." The judge nodded, reviewing the final pages. "Very well," she said. "Before we conclude, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened. The sound was subtle, barely noticeable. But everything changed. I didn't turn around right away. I didn't need to. I felt it, the shift in the room, the sudden tension, the silence that wasn't planned. Daniel turned first, and in the reflection of his eyes I saw it, confusion, then concern. He had taken everything. He just didn't know yet what that everything truly included. And for the first time since the divorce began, I wasn't the one holding my breath. The courtroom doors closed softly behind them. Two men stood at the back, dark suits, calm posture, expressions trained into neutrality. They didn't rush. They didn't announce themselves. One of them held a thin folder, the kind that looks unremarkable until it lands in the wrong hands. The judge paused mid-sentence. Daniel straightened in his chair. Mark Feldman turned, his confident smile faltering for the first time since I'd known him. One of the men approached their table and placed the folder in front of him. No explanation, no dramatics, just paper. Mark opened it. I watched the change ripple through him, subtle at first, then unmistakable. His lips parted as if to speak, then pressed into a thin line. He scanned the first page, then the second. His shoulders tightened. The color drained from his face. Daniel leaned in. "What is it?" he whispered, irritation creeping into his voice. "We're almost done here." Mark didn't answer immediately. He leaned closer and whispered 5 words. "They've opened a federal case." Daniel froze. For a split second, he looked like he hadn't heard correctly, like the words hadn't translated into meaning yet. Then his expression shifted, confusion giving way to disbelief. "What does that mean?" he demanded, louder than he intended. One of the men stepped forward. "Mr. Carter," he said calmly, "we're here to notify your counsel of an ongoing investigation involving Carter and Rowe Consulting." The room seemed to contract. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Is there an issue relevant to today's proceedings?" "Yes, Your Honor," the man replied. "Mr. Carter has just assumed sole ownership of the company, including all assets and liabilities." Liabilities. This time, the word landed. Daniel's head snapped toward me. Our eyes met across the room, and for the first time in months, his confidence cracked. Not anger, not arrogance, fear. "What investigation?" he said. "This is a mistake." Mark finally spoke, his voice tight. "Daniel, you need to listen." The second man placed another document on the table. "The investigation concerns financial activities conducted over the past 3 years. We'll be in touch regarding next steps." They didn't accuse. They didn't threaten. They didn't need to. They turned and walked out as quietly as they'd arrived. The doors closed again. Silence rushed in to fill the space they left behind. Daniel stared at the documents as if they might rearrange themselves into something harmless if he looked long enough. His jaw clenched. His breathing grew shallow. "This is because of you," he said suddenly, turning on me. His voice rose, sharp and desperate. "You did this. You set me up." The judge tapped her gavel once. "Mr. Carter, compose yourself." "I didn't do anything," he said, his words tumbling over each other now. "I signed what they told me to sign. She handled the details. She always handled the details." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Mark rubbed his temples. "Daniel," he said quietly, "the company is now yours. Completely. That includes any unresolved matters." Daniel shook his head. No, this isn't how this works." She was involved. She approved things. Mark looked at him with something close to pity. "Your name is on the approvals." Daniel stood up so abruptly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You can't do this," he said, pointing at me. "You let me take it knowing." "Mr. Carter," the judge said firmly, "sit down." He did, slowly, his hands trembling as he lowered himself back into the chair. I watched him then, not with satisfaction, not with triumph, but with a strange calm, the kind that comes when a truth finally stands on its own. Rachel leaned toward me, her voice barely audible. "Are you okay?" I nodded. I was, because everything I had done, every quiet agreement, every signature, Every moment of restraint had led exactly here. Daniel turned to me again, his voice breaking. "Why didn't you say anything?" I met his gaze steadily. "You never listened when I did." The judge cleared her throat. "Given the circumstances, this court's role today remains unchanged. The settlement stands as signed." Daniel's head dropped into his hands. The hearing concluded quickly after that, formalities wrapped in minutes. The judge exited. People stood, gathered their things, whispered to one another. Daniel remained seated. Mark spoke to him in hushed tones, his earlier confidence completely gone. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but I didn't need to. The truth had already been delivered. Rachel and I stood to leave. As we passed Daniel's table, he looked up at me, eyes red, voice low. "You knew," he said. "You knew, and you let me do it." I paused. "Yes," I said calmly. "I let you take exactly what you asked for." Outside, the air felt different, lighter, like the pressure I'd been carrying had finally lifted. Rachel exhaled deeply. "I've never seen anything like that." I gave a small smile. Neither had I. My phone buzzed with a message from the forensic accountant. "They've acknowledged receipt. Process is moving forward." I put the phone away. There was nothing left to do. Daniel had taken the house, the cars, the business, and with them, he had taken responsibility for a story he never expected to own. As I walked down the courthouse steps, I didn't feel like a winner. I felt free. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive with raised voices or slammed doors. Sometimes it arrives quietly. In 5 words? Spoken too late. To take back. The fallout didn't explode all at once. There were no headlines the next morning, no dramatic arrests on the courthouse steps. What followed was quieter and far more unsettling. For Daniel, the first sign came in the form of letters. Official ones. They arrived at the house he had fought so hard to keep, stamped with language that couldn't be argued away. Requests for records, notices of review, deadlines that didn't care about excuses or explanations. At first he tried to outrun it. He hired another lawyer, then another accountant. He told friends the investigation was routine, a misunderstanding, something his team would handle. He posted smiling photos online, as if projecting confidence might make it real. But stress has a way of leaking through the cracks. Meetings were canceled. Clients asked questions he couldn't answer. Vendors stopped returning calls. The company Daniel had paraded as his greatest achievement began to shrink under the weight of its own secrets. I heard about it in pieces. Rachel would update me when something directly affected custody or finances. A former colleague texted once, asking if I was okay, then quietly admitted things at the company felt off. Another friend mentioned seeing Daniel late at night at the office. Lights on long after everyone else had gone home. I didn't respond to any of it. My role in that chapter was finished. The investigation moved slowly but deliberately. Financial reviews, interviews, requests that couldn't be ignored. Daniel was forced to explain transactions he'd never expected to justify. The confidence he once wore so easily now fractured under scrutiny. When custody was revisited, the court took note. Stability mattered. Transparency mattered. And suddenly, the man who claimed I was too emotional to be trusted with numbers couldn't provide clear answers about his own. The arrangement shifted. I gained more time with the kids, more say in decisions, more space to rebuild something steady. Daniel tried to contact me once during that period. Just one message. "We need to talk." I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to say that hadn't already been written in documents, in signatures, in choices he made without me. Meanwhile, my life began to take shape again. I found a new role with a mid-sized firm that valued what I brought to the table. They didn't care about Daniel's name or the story attached to it. They cared about competence, about clarity, about trust. For the first time in years, I worked without bracing myself for dismissal. The kids adjusted faster than I expected. Lily asked thoughtful questions. Ethan asked simple ones. Both of them learned, in their own way, that change didn't always mean loss. Sometimes it meant relief. The house we moved into was smaller, but it was ours. We ate dinner together without tension humming under the surface. I slept better. I laughed more. As for Daniel, the last I heard, the company was no longer operating as it once had. Contracts dissolved, assets frozen, The future he had imagined slipped further out of reach, with every unanswered question he couldn't explain away. I didn't celebrate that. I didn't need to, because the point was never to watch him fall. The point was to stand back up myself. He took everything he asked for. And in doing so, he took on a weight he was never prepared to carry. I carried something else entirely. Peace. And for the first time since the divorce began, I knew the worst part was behind me. For a long time, I thought losing everything meant starting from nothing. I was wrong. Starting over isn't the same as being erased. And what I discovered, slowly and quietly, was that the things that mattered most had never been on the table in that courtroom, not once. The investigation continued in the background, moving at its own pace, guided by facts instead of emotions. I didn't follow every detail. I didn't need to. The process existed to protect the truth, not to satisfy my anger. What I focused on was rebuilding a life that felt honest again. I rebuilt routines, first school drop-offs, shared dinners, weekend walks that didn't feel rushed or tense. I rebuilt trust with my children by showing up consistently, by answering their questions without bitterness, by never speaking badly about their father even when it would have been easy. "Are we okay now?" Lily asked me one night as I tucked her in. "Yes," I said, brushing her hair back gently. "We are." And I meant it. Work became something I enjoyed again. I was respected for my insight, trusted with responsibility, and included in decisions instead of pushed aside. I didn't have to prove my worth by staying silent anymore. I could speak and be heard. Daniel and I communicated only when necessary, mostly about the kids. The anger that once burned in me faded into something lighter. Acceptance, not forgiveness. Not forgetting but understanding that his choices were his to carry, mine were mine. One afternoon, as I sat on the balcony of our apartment watching the sun dip behind the buildings, it finally hit me. I hadn't lost everything. I had lost a version of my life that depended on being overlooked. What I gained was clarity. I learned that strength doesn't always look like resistance. Sometimes it looks like restraint, like patience, like knowing when to step back and let the truth move forward without you pushing it. In the divorce, my husband took everything. The house, the cars, the business. He believed those things defined success. He believed taking them meant winning. But what he really took was responsibility for every decision he made without me, every line he signed without reading, every shortcut he assumed would stay hidden. I walked away with something else. My name, my integrity, my future. And if you're listening to this because you feel like you're standing on the edge of losing everything too, I want you to know this. Sometimes the moment that feels like surrender is actually the moment you reclaim your power. Not by fighting louder, but by standing firm, letting the truth do its work, and choosing to move forward with your head held high. I didn't lose everything. I finally found myself again.